Avatar: The Last Airbender is a show that defined the childhood of an entire generation. And looking back on it, it was also a lot of people's first experience with more mature concepts. The show explores trauma, discrimination, imperialism, toxic familial relationships very well to an audience that might not even know what these words mean. But I also realized that the show, among other things, also serves as a solid blueprint on how to write female characters. So in this video, I'll talk about how this 20-year-old television show is still a solid basis for how to write women. And of course, I'll have to talk about spoilers for the following, but let's be real, you've already seen this show. So let's start this video off by talking about purpose. A lot of the time, a woman character will exist without any real agency. They're usually written to just serve the plot in some way, like acting as a love interest and goal for the protagonist, or as a damsel to be saved, and effectively serving as a stepping stone to highlight the hero's strength. And female characters have been written this way for centuries, even before the show premiered, and bad writers continue to write women this way to this day. Damsels are a problematic character trope in today's media landscape because it implies that all women are weak and they need saving. And in terms of writing, usually damsels aren't given any real traits, they're just used as plot devices and to illustrate how powerful the protagonist is. To cite an example, Mary Jane Watson in the Raimi trilogy is very much a damsel, as it can feel like she only exists to be saved by Spider-Man and act as a love interest. This is especially egregious in the first movie, and she's also just a horrible human being in these movies, but that's a topic for another video. But going back to Avatar, I enjoy how the show's female characters are written with subverting this idea in mind. Take Katara, for example. She has a clear motivation and reason for joining Aang on his journey. Being the only waterbender in the Southern Water Tribe, she has nobody to help her hone her ability, so she joins Aang in the journey to the North Pole to find a waterbending master. This shows that her character has agency and doesn't exist revolving around Aang, and she only kind of joins him out of convenience, considering that he has pretty much the same mission in trying to find a waterbending master, and he has a flying bison as well. But while Aang is helping her out, their relationship is mutually beneficial. Being trapped in an iceberg for 100 years, he has no idea how the world might have changed, so he needs some kind of guide to walk him past everything that's happened, and Katara seems to be knowledgeable enough to be that person for him. And he also just needs a friend. Thus, while Aang is doing Katara a service, she isn't a burden on him, especially as she grows to become a waterbending master and help Aang reach that level of aptitude. You might think that this is pretty basic, but not everybody understands how to write women with agency and purpose in the narrative. There's a lot of egregious examples, especially in anime. One that's permanently branded into my mind is Sword Art Online, specifically in the Aincrad arc, where the female characters not named Asuna kind of just exist to add to the main character's harem. But going back to Avatar, Toph is also a fully realized character. She joins the group because her heart yearns for adventure, and she also wishes to escape the smothering of her overprotective family. While she does go on to teach Aang earthbending as his master, joining the group is just as convenient to her as she is to them. What's interesting though is when you think about a female character that exists in the show that doesn't have any real agency and only exists to serve the will of another man, it's Azula, an antagonist. Think about it. Why does Azula chase after the Avatar with such vigor? What does she, the princess of the Fire Nation, have to gain from capturing the Avatar? She is already one of the most powerful people on the show politically, and people submit to her will all the time. Well, she just wants approval from her father. Her motivation as a character is to seek validation from her father to a toxic degree. It's like she only exists to enact his will, and she's addicted to the praise she gets by being his lapdog, likely because otherwise she would give him very little attention. One of the reasons why The Beach from Book 3 is such a great episode in terms of characterization is that it sheds light on the fact that Azula is barely a person. She doesn't know how to interact with people outside of her usual circles. And even then, she barely treats them like people as well. It makes me question whether they're even really friends at all. After all, Mei and Ty Lee end up betraying her down the line. And while she does have an interest in men, she doesn't know how to attract them. In The Beach, all she talks about are conquest, domination, status, and superiority. These are things that the Fire Lord values, for sure, but Does she have anything that she values that are her own and hers alone? The fact that Toph and Katara are depicted as the good girls and Azula as the bad girl is the writers implying that women should exist with agency and should not base their entire person around someone else. Katara and Toph are well-written women because they're independent characters, and Azula is a well-written deconstruction of the idea that a woman's only purpose should be to serve the will of a man. And speaking of strong, I think we also need to talk about writing strength. When you think of the word strong, it often evokes the imagery of flexed muscles, clenched fists, and skill in martial arts. And while these images are often associated with strength, they should not be the only things associated with the term. Oftentimes, a show, movie, or book will write a female character but give them the physical characteristics of a man, making them taller than average, muscular, powerful, or in modern terms, butch. And let me be clear, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, a lot of them are incredibly well written, like Luisa from Encanto. But when writing strong female characters, you have to remember that strength can be portrayed without eliminating femininity. Because when you create a strong female character who completely lacks feminine qualities, and that is your only depiction of strength, you imply that strength can only be achieved when femininity is eliminated. The reason why characters like Vi from Arcane, Brienne of Tarth from Game of Thrones, and even Katniss Everdeen to an extent from the Hunger Games work is because underneath their more masculine front, they are still undoubtedly women. Vi has a sense of tenderness about her, especially when she's talking to people she trusts, like Caitlyn. Brienne opened herself up emotionally and fell in love with Jaime, and Katniss has a fierce mother bear-like sense of protection for her little sister. These kinds of characters don't portray strength as a lack of femininity, but rather that these two traits aren't mutually exclusive. And this is something that The Last Airbender tells us through its female characters. Katara is a clear example of this. She's the best waterbender on the show, and it's something that she's earned. But she's also very feminine. She's empathetic, motherly, and tender when she needs to be. But I think an even better example is Toph. Now, Toph is very much masculine coded. When we first meet Toph, she completely rejects life as a noble's daughter, instead preferring that of a professional earthbender, which is a profession dominated by men. And she even cheers when she finds out that the Ember Island play has a muscular male actor portraying her. Even her element, Earth, is linked to physical strength and endurance, traits typically associated with male characters. And the show also does a pretty good job at establishing that Toph is not like other girls through her mannerisms and general demeanor. But in the episode The Tales of Ba Sing Se, Katara takes Toph out on a girls' day. And while the two are enjoying each other's company, we see that Toph is affected when a group of other girls makes fun of her appearance. And after dealing with them, we see that Toph then goes on to say that she doesn't care how she looks and that she's confident and she knows who she is. Yet as she's saying these things, it becomes abundantly clear to us and to Katara that these words are only masking the truth. That even she wants to feel pretty, and Katara gives her that validation. It's an important moment because it shows that for all her machismo and big talk, Toph is still a young woman. Another good example is Ty Lee. Usually in fiction, feminine leading characters aren't skilled fighters, but Ty Lee is a great counterexample. She's a ditzy pretty girl and is certainly more feminine than her associates Mei and Azula, especially since her feminine qualities are more emphasized compared to other female characters. But that never takes away from the fact that she is easily one of the most capable fighters on the show, perhaps one of the most dangerous ones at that. In a world where a lot of people rely solely on their bending in combat, having someone who can eliminate that and is used to fighting without it can be a deadly foe. And even without bending, we know that Ty Lee can just turn your limbs into useless noodles. She's a strong fighter, but she's also a feminine character, reinforcing the idea that the show portrays strength and femininity as traits that can go hand in hand. But as powerful as the female characters are on this show, none of them are portrayed as overpowered. And that goes in line with the rest of the show. I mean, even Aang has his flaws, and he's the damn Avatar, so making the other characters on the show flawed as well shows consistency. Even Iroh, the sage character, is flawed in the sense that he places too much trust in Zuko. And while these characters are powerful, none of them are perfect, and that's the most important aspect when writing an interesting character. Flaws make the characters interesting. They drive conflict and push the story forward, but they also make the characters human and relatable, allowing us to see pieces of ourselves through them. Each of the main girl characters has a major flaw. For example, Katara has a temper and can lash out unnecessarily on her friends. She also tends to be controlling and assert her will on the rest of the gang when they're not meeting her expectations. This led to her lashing out at Toph during the episode The Chase, amplified by their lack of sleep due to being hunted down by Azula and her team. Meanwhile, Toph is emotionally distant and stubborn, stemming from her desire to show that she's not some helpless little girl. She can sometimes go overboard, though much to the dismay of the people around her. And while she is an earthbending prodigy, she does have the caveat of being blind, and though her earth-sensing ability mostly circumvents this, there are situations where her effectiveness is limited because of her disability. For example, she's illiterate because the world of Avatar doesn't seem to have Braille. She also can't swim, and she's incredibly susceptible to projectile attacks. She also lacks empathy, teasing Sokka about his obvious insecurity of not being able to bend, and she insults Katara for her controlling behavior. She even calls Aang, the Avatar, a bit of a weakling. And then there's Azula, who's a whole pile of character flaws. She's controlling, manipulative, and has no real personality besides trying to please her father. She has difficulty relating to others and even attracting men. And even if she's a crazy powerful villain, we, the audience, understand that deep down, she is an incredibly damaged individual. And the other female characters are flawed too. Ty Lee has difficulty asserting her will, especially against Azula. Mei is emotionally distant, preventing her from expressing herself and bonding with her compatriots, and Suki lacks screen time. But even with how the show writes women, it's not completely absent of tropes. One example is that Katara, a female and a waterbender, is a healer. And this is a pretty common trope, especially in fantasy settings. We see this very much in Naruto, where Sakura and Tsunade, two of the most powerful female characters on the show, are medical ninja, and while they do have feats outside of healing, many people think of these characters as healers, as they are heavily characterized as such. In fact, the latter of the two is quite literally the greatest medical ninja in the entire history of the series. Meanwhile, Katara learns how to heal and even shows an aptitude for it. So the show does utilize the trope, but using tropes is not necessarily a bad thing. It's relying on them heavily or using them uncreatively that hurts the writing. It's a plot point on the show that Katara wants to be more than just a healer, and even squares off against Pakku, a trained waterbending master, to show that she's just as worthy as the men. And a badly written scene would be Katara beating Pakku to prove that, hey, girls are just as good as men, but she ultimately doesn't. After all, he's a waterbending master, and while Katara has grown a lot as a bender throughout the first season, she still has a lot to learn. But Pakku goes on to teach her anyway after he realizes that maybe some traditions bring more harm than good and are ultimately not worth continuing. I like how the writers for this episode address the trope, and while they ultimately adopt it, they do so while showing that Katara is more than just a healer. She has every right to learn to be a capable fighter, and I love that. Because sometimes tropes are inevitable. They're common for a reason, but over-relying on them is a mark of a bad writer, and using them without putting some kind of twist is the mark of a lazy one. The fact that Katara didn't just put her head down and accept that she'd be the healer shows some self-awareness on the show's part. And those are just some examples of how the show was ahead of its time when it came to writing women. When you really think about it, the show really built a whole blueprint on how to write female characters that people can easily follow for decades. In fact, the show is a great guide on how to write characters in fiction in general, not just women. And that's just a testament as to how good the show is, and illustrates why studios like Netflix are trying their hardest to recapture the magic that the original series once had. And if you liked this video, be sure to leave a like and comment down your thoughts below. Hit that sub button if you want more content like this, and consider being a member to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.